Welcome back to Inside City Hall. As we've been reporting, the House ethics trial of Charles Rangel began today with the peculiar sight of the defendant walking out of the proceedings. The congressman was hoping for a delay, which the members of the ethics committee did not grant. But did the move affect the committee's approach to the public trial? Here to discuss that topic and much more are the four members of our Consultants Corner, Republicans Susan Del Percio and Tom Doherty, and Democrats Jeff Pollock and George Arzt. Thank you for joining us. So, Susan, I'll begin with you. What do you think was behind Congressman Rangel's strategy to give his public statement and walk out?
You know, I think basically he knows he's been beaten on this. It's really quite pathetic that this is going on and on. His excuse of not having time for an attorney, this has been going on for 2 years, that he's already spent $2 million, so he didn't have proper funding for it. This is all absurd, and he's trying to drag it out as long as possible. He
did have, they said, 2 years to set up a fund. His lawyers tried to give him some type of agreement where he would pay less. It would be more affordable to him.
But he already had a fund of over $2 million. He used his campaign coffers to defend himself.
What do you think behind it?
Well, the question is, what's behind the walkout? Put the other stuff aside. The walkout is pure, beautiful theater. I mean, that's what it was. It was an attempt to be theatrical, which is what, frankly, Charlie Rangel and some of the best politicians that we know, that's what they're good at. They're good at political theater. And Charlie knows the body extremely well and knows that one of the things about that ethics committee is you got 5 of each, right? 5 of each flavor, the Republicans and Democrats, which largely leads to stalemates and no action. So to me, it was about the television cameras and having us discuss it, and it succeeded in doing that.
He knows where the votes are, and he knows full well that what he was doing today. It was a strategy. He was trying to delay, and he's hopeful that he'll get somewhere in this. I don't know if it will irritate members of the committee. That's what I don't know.
How do you see this playing out? What do you see being the punishment, if any?
Well, I mean, I think that the sad part of it is that by walking out and by dragging this on and by bringing up the fact that he doesn't have a legal defense fund, which most Americans don't get a chance to say, I can't have a lawyer, let's hold off on my trial because I don't have a legal defense fund, after he's already blown $2 million on lawyers, and we find out today that the lawyers have said...
Well, they can get pro bono representation, which Charles Rangel isn't allowed.
But the point is that he's already spent $2 million on lawyers. I mean, and the lawyers themselves today have said, well, we didn't want to leave, we would have worked something out with him. I don't understand why, after the people of his community said, we want you back, we don't care what happened. Take the slap on the wrist. That's all it is. They're not throwing you in jail. There's no expulsion involved.
But that's why he did it, Tom. I mean, I agree with you.
But I think you wind up irritating the people who, I think by and large, listen, everybody who's ever met or worked with Charlie Rangel says, this is a good guy. He's a war hero. You may disagree with him politically or whatever. People, you know, fellow members of Congress on both sides said, we like Charlie Rangel. They all just want this kind of just to go away.
Right.
And so he's just to just say, okay, where are we going? Let's get this thing done. And if his lawyers over the last 2 years haven't been able to negotiate this for him, I got to say he wasted a lot of money.
There's also not a lot at stake because he's now in the. It's not like he's going to try and get his committee back. He's in the minority, with the change.
Well, but he's living on his own terms.
Exactly.
Yes, he does want to live. Absolutely, I agree.
And look, again, theater is like there's a shtick to it, and like I said, Charlie Rangel understands that. But also, I mean, we're focused a little bit too much on sort of the inner arguments. Do I think it was good to say he didn't have the money to bring up a legal defense fund? No, but at the end of the day, the committee then said, we don't even need to hear anything, frankly, because we've seen it all. So both sides, at the end of the day, really said today, we know what's here. Let's get down to business.
Is that what it was? I mean, he's not really contesting anything that's been put out there.
Politician.
Yeah. Right,
this is what everything's all about. And so he moved the street to Congress. Right. That's all he did.
But to Jeff's point is it really in Charlie Rangel's best interest that we're here talking about this tonight? I mean, should we be talking about
anything?
No, because his constituency loves him and supports him.
And they love
And doesn't this help him in getting even more sympathy among his constituents?
It could. That's the theater part.
Or they could be frustrated and say enough with it. I mean, there's a reason why he wanted to pass the election. So he didn't have his slap. I mean, everyone knows that, like Tom said, he was going to get a slap on the wrist, maybe censure the worst possible case, but he's not going to have to do. Nothing's going to really happen. So he waited until after the election so he can have it. But now he should just, show some dignity and let him and go now. I mean, it's enough.
All right, you kind of already gave your answers, but I'm now going to have you grade Congressman Rangel's decision to leave the hearings today. Susan, I'll begin with you.
I gave him an F. If I could have given him a P for pathetic, I would have done that, but I gave him an F.
Jeff.
I gave him a B for the theatrics. It was Marion Barry-esque in its sort of over-the-top theatrics, and you know what? That's paid off before, so God bless.
Tom.
Well, I gave him an F, but after listening to Jeff and the theatrics, which I really liked, I'm going to move the F to a D.
Too bad we can't change it.
But it's an
yeah,
F in writing, but I'm giving Jeff a little bump up because he made a very good point on the theatrics. So a D.
Okay, George.
I gave him a C because I'm hoping there's a strategy here and an end game.
All right, let's talk about, let's move away from Washington and talk about something in the city. Cathie Black, Mayor Bloomberg's pitch for schools chancellor. It's become a controversial pitch. George, how do you see this playing out?
I think that right now things are relatively calm, believe it or not. There are people yelling about her education credentials, but I think overall things are calm. I think when whether Steiner rules and gives her a waiver is another question. I think that Shelley may have an influence here, and that could be interesting.
So you don't see this being a rubber stamp? On the
Oh, no. Listen, I was there when Bobby Wagner, I was at City Hall when Bobby Wagner was turned down by Gordon Ombach. And
to become superintendent.
Oh, I know what can happen.
And Jeff?
Yeah, I think it's, I also remember the same controversy, though, when Joel Klein was first brought up, and, you know, the mayor makes an impassioned plea for his choice in terms of his governance and his mayoralty, and I think that does have an impact. I also hear a lot more grumbling, and maybe that's just because we're in the last term of the mayoralty, so I'm not sure. I mean, where George is, I don't know where this thing ends up. But I do know that, like I said, if we remember back to the Joel Klein argument, it all felt very much the same as it feels now.
But if I recall with Joel Klein, there was this public search. I believe there were newspaper ads looking for a chancellor. In this case, it didn't seem any type of search.
Anyone think there was a search?
There was at least another candidate, yes.
Is that also part of it, that a lot of people are saying she was picked, she was the only selection?
Yeah, clearly that grabbed everybody by surprise, the speed at which this happened. But George has a very valid point. A lot is going to depend on whether this starts percolating about the waiver and whether or not the mayor is going to have a need to call a Sheldon Silver because of his influence with the State Department of Education or not. But, you know, it was funny in that reading sort of the people on the streets comments about this thing is that there did seem to be a lot of people who did support the idea that, you know, just because you didn't come out of academia, that more you had a business approach to running it. That seemed to be a positive for her. And her qualifications in that relation, I think, are very positive for her.
And what does she need to do? Does she need to get out there? She has really been kind of behind closed doors since her selection last week.
No, I think she should, in fact, keep her head down. I mean, she was chosen, and the reason why most people are okay with it, she does have impeccable credentials. I think, you know, you do need a manager, but it's the fact that Mike Bloomberg chose her, which, you know, questions what happens to when other folks who maybe people don't have as much faith in do the same type of thing. So there's a little bit of a slippery slope there. But I think when we talk about theatrics, frankly, I think this is a time to let everyone sound off and make their noise so they can say they had some kind of public scrutiny and take credit for they vetted her and what have you. But at the end of the day, she'll get the waiver.
Yeah, I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure I'd take that approach to differ with Susan, because the difference between Joel Klein and this situation is that Joel Klein had been vetted, right? He'd already been through sort of a very public vetting in terms of his previous experience.
He had been in public service.
He had been in public service before, right? We'd heard it all in terms of his work with the presidential administration. And so I think that that's why, to me, I'd like to hear a little bit more from her and to hear about it. There's no question her business credentials are impeccable, but I think that that is a small difference. So I might advise her to get out a little bit more. Obviously, she's listening to the mayor.
Joel Klein was a different time. Joel Klein was a time when the city was, when the Bloomberg administration was taking over the school system, and this was the mayor's guy. It's now 10 years later. You know, it's a different game.
But you have to imagine that the mayor, with him being, you know, his legacy being education, he's only going to put forward someone who he truly believes could really do a fantastic job, and definitely maybe didn't have a public vetting but probably did quite a bit of vetting behind the scenes.
Yeah, I have no doubt about that. I mean, that's what I'm saying. I trust the mayor on this. I mean, really, I do think that we all have to give the mayor sort of his due in terms of leading the schools. He's always said the buck stops here. I'm just saying, from a PR advice, for me, I'd push her out there.
All right, we have about a minute left. George, I'll go back to you. Let's talk about Andrew Cuomo's transition. He set up a number of committees. Is he appeasing concerns that were raised last week, particularly by Reverend Al Sharpton, that his transition committee is not diverse?
I don't think so. I think what he's doing is putting in the establishment and making sure that everyone is covered by it, and the people who were with him all along, like Carl McCall, is there now.
So you think it's mainly the establishment that's on these committees?
Mainly the establishment, yes.
The transition's irrelevant. It is a way of placating your supporters throughout the campaign, looking that you're reaching out for, you know, the old guard, the new guard, and just getting through the next couple of weeks. But it's irrelevant to running the government.
It's a good PR stunt.
All right, yes. Susan, you get the final word. Thank you for joining us tonight. It's time for a break. I'll be back with a preview of tomorrow night's program. Stay with us.